I will introduce our guests, then they will talk about themselves, and then we will start. And of course, you're more than welcome to join and raise your hand. We will approach you with the mic. In the meantime, I will present our speakers. Roland Chojnacki, Polish diplomat and culture manager, for years engaged in promoting Polish arts and culture, tied with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for over 25 years, and starting from April 2024, he is a director of public diplomacy and cultural and promotion of Poland in this ministry. Enough. Okay. Then Oliwia Bosomtwe, author of a book, Jak Biały Człowiek, published last year, describing Polish imagination about blackness and black experiences of black Poles, presented in Brussels, among other places. She was a journalist and national editor of Noise.pl. He also published in Republika Nowa and Vogue, among others. And our last panelist, guest, is Gábor, Csaba, Márton. And he deals with theater, play, and contemporary dance, working both with neurodiverse and neurotypical people, kids and adults. He's a culture manager, a person who, has many walks of life, cultural life and educational, pedagogical life. And as far as part of the deconfining project, he traveled to Zambia as an educator and coach. He is also a director of Arts Pillar in Pro Progressione, which is our partner in the confining project. Welcome to all of you. And thank you very much for accepting the invitation to this conversation. As I said, I would ask you to present yourselves, your perspective. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation. And let me have a confession. At first, I feel uneasy a bit because usually when I present in public, I talk about others, not about myself. So if you need more time, I will share my 5 minutes or part of my 5 minutes with you if you want. Yes, I'm heading the Cultural Diplomacy Department in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Poland. It's a department that deals with the nicest tasks, I would say, the most interesting tasks, because we're dealing with promoting Polish culture abroad, and the promotion of Poland in general as well. I'm not sure how much you're aware the structure of the public diplomacy in the previous panel. Anna Godlewska talked about it, but we have 3 basic tools that were mentioned. Let me just remind everyone. So the department I'm heading right now organizes study visits for artists, curators, activists all over the world that come to Poland. This is one of the most successful, I think, and proven tools in terms of getting people and nations closer to each other. It works. We organize around 80 visits a year. Also for the artists, mostly for journalists from Africa. Apart from that, we function through our venues and branches. Polish diplomacy has 3 kinds of venues: embassies, general consulates, and Polish institutes. And all of them organize certain activities within cultural diplomacy or public diplomacy. These actions would be coordinated by our department. And last but not least, we're trying also to support NGOs that cooperate with their international partners. That is why we have different grant competitions. I'm looking at a survival director for you competitions as well. So please answer our calls. And coming back to myself, I have spent 3/4 of my life abroad, and I think that gives me this dual perspective. On one hand, I represent, as a Polish diplomat, I represent Poland, but also, and I hope it doesn't sound like boasting, but I think I have enough empathy to look at the number of problems we are dealing with from the perspective of our partners, including African partners. And there's one personal thing I wanted to share with you. I think a breakthrough time for me were 4 years that I spent in the countries of the global south, namely 2 years in Ethiopia and 2 years in India. I think this gave me a unique perspective. This experience I got there, allowed me to be more humble, for sure. Back then I was a young diplomat. I was full of myself. I thought that just because I studied in London and I know 5 languages, I understand every problem of the world. It turns out that I was proven wrong. The world turned out to be much more complex than it seems from our European perspective. So that's it in terms of my introduction. Thank you. I feel a lot was said or has been said in the introduction that you read about me. So to quote my predecessor, world, even in Poland, is much more complex than we think it is. You don't need to leave our own country to realize that at some point of your life. And it applies to many different areas, of course. And then it is up to you if you want to understand the complexity or just not. And I think this willingness to understand things around me pushed me to, for example, become a journalist. And I also wrote a book because of that, and I finished it. Right now I'm working on different projects. The exhibition in the Museum of Contemporary Art in Warsaw that will also look at these phenomena, dealing with the past that I'm particularly interested in. I think, yes, we have a long-standing history of working with this global south that we forgot or swept under the rug, so to say, or started to separate ourselves from after the political shift at the beginning of the 90s. And right now, I think we're slowly learning that we can separate things and we can learn from our past, not just forget about it. And right now, we're learning how to use those experiences from the past. And I think this is something fascinating for me when I'm dealing with these relations between Poland and the African countries. To tylko jeszcze parę słów. Those who have joined us and they don't speak English, please collect your sets. Gábor is not going to be speaking Polish, so if you want to understand him fuller, use a headset.
Hello everyone, my name is Gábor Csaba Márton, as Gósa said. I'm from Hungary and I'm representing here Pro Progressione, which is a Hungarian international artistic hub based in Budapest, and we mainly work with applied arts. So our projects are connected with applied arts. So we are always trying to focus on works and support artists to somehow discover the possibilities, how they can contribute to the changes that we experience in the past, I don't know, at least I don't know, since the Second World War, so there's a lot of changes happening in Europe, and artists were always in the front, and we believe in that they still need to act in the society as pioneers and someone who raise awareness and raise critical thinking, and deconfining it's really well fit into that concept of somehow, I don't know, somehow think critically about our position towards the African countries. We most of the time we speak about Africa, which is actually a continent with a lot of different countries in it, and all the different countries has different kind of cultures. Especially, for example, just Zambia, where our partners are from, they speak more than 60 languages. They have so different cultures within the country as well. So it's really interesting. For me, it was already really interesting when we started the project to think about that it's already, so the first sentence that we all most of the time use, that we try to find new ways to, I don't know, to collaborate between two continents, it's already somehow, I don't know, biased. And it's really interesting for me from about my point of view and who am I actually. So I work mainly I work as a theater and education professional. I work with a lot of different people with different backgrounds. It's also important for me because I studied intercultural psychology and education at ELTE, which is a university in Hungary. And it was especially interesting for me in the case of deconfining how we can have an impact on how we look at each other. And yeah, I'm really eager to share some experience with you about it. Yeah.
Okay, first question to you, Oliwia. If you could say something that for people who haven't had the chance of reading your book yet, could you share what is the book about? And you show the experience of blackness in Polish society. Could you share how does it influence the practices of international cooperation and the turn that we observe in the last couple of years? So from our perspectives, because of grants, because of Creative Europe grant, we will all start noticing that, well, we have had some common history with African countries. Could you tell us more about your book? A very broad question, actually. I tried to show many different aspects in my book because it starts now, and with every chapter, with every protagonist, we're going back in the past. So the book finishes in the 18th century, accompanied by Tadeusz Kościuszko. So it touches upon many different areas of Polish history, and I really wanted to show, as far as I wanted to, as far back as I wanted to go, so to the period of partitions of Poland. In each of these stories, we have some minorities, people from representing a minority that in the past probably got here by coincidence, wanting to experience some adventure, maybe. But it's not a new thing. This is what I wanted to show. When we dwell on our history, it turns out that, the history is much more varied, much more complex that we learned about at school. So people have always traveled, even if that was much more difficult, and it was not just about going online and booking a ticket, and there were interesting conclusions, interesting thing happening, and this is what I wanted to show in my book. And as part of that search I conducted, despite many attempts, the relations between our region, I'm not saying Poland deliberately because the borders shifted, the names shifted, but the relations have always been, having this external perspective. third person's perspective. We don't have our own approach, our own outlook on things. And we mostly basing our ideas about some ideologies that were already there around Europe. Of course, ideologies that had some colonialist aspects. And then due to the events or political structure or domination of certain cultural aspects, it's interesting to observe, an interesting phenomenon to observe. And then to get to the end of your question, I think we live in a very interesting moment. I'm pretty sure it's a cliche, but let me explain myself. I think many different processes here, we're at the crossroads of many different processes, mutually exclusive actually. On one hand, there's been some time after the political transformation, and we are able to look at the communist heritage with bigger distance and say, well, okay, these were crimes, and let's not do this anymore. But then some things, even though they were not ideologically proven or ideologically correct, well, they went beyond the horizon and created something. And this is about our relations with the global south, because we have had relations and there are strong connections between personal biographies from Central and Eastern Europe and African individuals. So there is a beginning of this African diaspora. People who are descendants of those who went to Africa and stayed, or vice versa, came from Africa. So people start traveling, start discovering that there are some elements like that. There are exhibitions, different projects, different forms of cooperation that recall this memory, this mutual relations. And then there are numerous political challenges, crises, different situations that are, well, not in line with any political vision. We don't know how to deal with that. And of course, there is anxiety related to that in the society and does not make things easier. Also
an interest due to maybe the fact that we are all tired of this anxiety we are having right now in Europe, that there's something more to that there are some parts in the world that we used to perceive as lost for many different reasons are not actually lost. And maybe we should look there for ideas and building economic or artistic relations, or maybe we should be philosophically interested of this common experience is necessary. And I think that this is the thawing in this area. I would like to add two things. I would like to recommend you the book. I've been reading it since yesterday. I read quite a lot, over 100 pages actually. And it's well-written book, very interesting book. You spend a lot of time in the archives and on discussions with your characters. It's not only about historical people, but about common people that live among us. There are different aspects that you've mentioned already. But what's interesting for me, maybe because I am a diplomat, was the fragment about a history, Polish review, and its influence on how in the communist era in the 60s and the 70s we reached with the information about Polish culture and about Poland to the citizens of Africa. I can recommend article about the warehouse. If you're interested, I can give you the title of the article because this is story of the Polish PR activities, and this is like the remnant of the past includes Polish graphical artists. So thank you for the recommendation. It's worth to read about it more. When I can redirect the question into the perspective of the public diplomacy institution, the relation between Poland and African countries in terms of culture, and how did These assumptions of Polish and African cooperation have changed over the last almost 20 years. You can talk about Addis Ababa and other things. I can start from obvious things. I think that we've talked about it during the Survival Festival quite a lot. Gábor, you've mentioned that in your introduction. We have to be aware that Africa is actually a gigantic continent, 56 different countries, over 3,000 different languages, all possible religions in one place. And of course, we have this stereotypical image of Africa in our heads. A continent that is corrupted, governed by dictatorships, with famine, where it's dangerous, violent. And in all that stereotype is more than a grain of truth. But still, we need to be aware and we need to ask ourselves a question if we're talking about the real Africa. There are some African countries, the richest African countries, 5 times richer than the poorest country in Europe. There is an African country, there are African countries in which democratic standards are doing much better than in European countries, like in Botswana, Malawi. There are some countries than, for example, in Southern Africa, Republic of Southern Africa, rights of people, of LGBT people, are doing better than in Europe. So, of course, we use general ideas, and it can be misleading. From my perspective, you ask about Addis Ababa. In this ocean of variety, Ethiopia is also a unique country, and they are proud of that. Citizens of Ethiopia are proud of that. I don't know if you're aware of the fact that this is one of 2 African countries that has never been colonized. It has its very serious consequences. This is the one African country in which official language is the local language, not the language of the colonizer. And I think that people in Ethiopia were proud of that for many, many years. But this is at the same time their weakness, because access to information in the world that we live in, the world that is taking actually place online. And in terms of English and French, well, we have a lot of resources and they have limited access to that. So they pay the price for that, despite the fact that they're a proud nation. That's in terms of introduction. Africa and its diversity. But in terms of our vision of intercultural cooperation with Africa, or in general about relations with Africa, I would tell diplomatic way that they are good and based on partnership. We don't have any bilateral problems or political problems with particular countries, no matter if we talk about dictatorships or if we talk about democratic nations. Recently, we asked the ministry to conduct the study about the image of Poland, and I don't think it will be a surprise for you. If we look at the regions of the world in terms of continents, the smallest recognition of Poland is in Africa. We are not recognized there. This is bad information. We are at the 80-something place out of 200 or more countries. The good information is that even if we focus on the quality studies instead of quantitative studies, so if we take into account only the opinion of African countries who know anything about Poland, then Poland ranks better. We are on the 31st position. And in the entire rank, the average rank is 32. So we have some relations. In terms of economy, it's similar. At the moment, this is not the region that we trade. I wouldn't say that. Less than 2% of the entire Polish trade is devoted to African countries. And if we extract from this African bag 4 main partners, Egypt, Morocco, Nigeria, and Republic of Southern Africa, that would be even worse. But still, we can see some silver lining here. We are living in an interesting world. What I mean by that is that we are living in the constantly changing world. And I think that we can see some first sign of changes. And I notice them. They are small, but not really. I will give you 2 examples. 20 years ago, when we wanted to go to Africa, that would be difficult to do in terms of communication. We have 3 direct connections with 3 African countries, and I'm not talking about Egypt. I'm talking about charter flights to Addis Ababa, from Warsaw to Cairo, and with Marrakesh. And we've had it for a year. And what is even more positive, I don't know if you know how many students from Africa we are having right now in Poland. I know, over 10,000. 10,000 students from Africa, which is a great change. And this well represented in the book written by Oliwia. We had a golden time of academic relations in the 1960s. It began in the 80s. It was booming. In the 70s, it was booming, and in the 80s, that was the best time for African students in Poland because they were much richer than Poles and they could exist in Poland well. And then there was a collapse in the 90s and at the beginning of the 21st century. And now we try to rebound, and we've been doing it profoundly. The most students come from Zimbabwe to Poland. This is how it looks like in terms of Polish-African relations. But in terms of the culture itself, I have the Ethiopian culture because, as I said, this country has never been colonized. That's why any imposing or cultural institution look differently than in many other regions that have a history of colonization by Brits or by French people. That's why we're talking about different aspects. They perceive culture differently than we do. When we think about Ethiopia and their culture, we think about Ethiopian jazz. Jazz Ethiopic that is well known everywhere, let's say discovered by Europeans in the mid-70s. The average Ethiopian had never heard about it. This is a culture that affects westernized middle class in several music clubs in Addis Ababa only. But what's important for them and what's played a major role there, and what we have problem with accepting that this is the role of religion, which is a biological clock of the life of the entire society, at least in Ethiopia. And many different cultural events are connected with religion, basically dance. I would like to add one more thing. I would like now to look for a woman from the previous panel, and Miśniakiewicz again was criticized by you, like other authors, Tuwim and other Polish poets and authors. I don't want to debate with you and to take out particular quotes and discuss them, but this is not the perspective of Poles. You may be surprised, but I've never read the book. I've saw the movie. But when I was in high school, not in Warsaw, not in Krakow, but in a small town in Poland, in Bydgoszcz, I think it was in 1980s. I read different books. I wrote the book by Csaba. And I used to have a girlfriend from Africa, and actually she wrote the book Desert and Wilderness. She didn't like it, but she wasn't surprised. She said that it's just an anachronism from the 19th century. And the racist fragments didn't surprise her because of Kipling and other authors from British, French literature. So I would like just to comment on what you've said in the previous panel. But I, of course, agree with what you said in the previous panel. We have to fight with our own ignorance and do whatever we can to foster interest with others, especially with Africa.
Thank you. From a cultural practitioner, a person who co-created very important initiatives, intercultural initiatives, Gábor, how did the experience in Zambia change your approach to intercultural projects? I know that you've been doing it for years. So could you say if it influenced, and if so, how did it influence your perspective? And one more, how to build trust and sense of community in such projects, especially in projects with different participants' background, different experience in working with the body, for example.
Okay. It had a big effect on me. This was my first time when I left the continent, actually. So it's a pretty special experience when I was there with our Zambian colleagues. And I had the pleasure to work with not just with them, but also with some facilitators from Barefoot Theatre. As you could hear in the documentary, they work mainly with children from the streets, and they try to support them to realize their position and to realize their possibilities to be an active actor of their own life. And beside them, beside the children, I worked with some facilitators of them, and all the experiences were quite interesting and unique. The first thing that I would like to share is that colonization has a really big effect on how these youngsters approach people coming from any foreign places. So it was really hard, even if I had education on how to work in intercultural context, even if I tried to prepare myself to be as equal as possible. It was really interesting to see their perception and their attitude towards me. So it was really hard in these 2 weeks when I worked with them to somehow reach that kind of equality from their point of view. So how they looked at me. Just to share one experience, after a series of workshops, we had three workshops in one of the centers in Lusaka. And at the end of these 3 workshops, one of the facilitators gave to me some letters and resumes from the children, because they still saw me after 3 days of working together. They still saw me someone who came to there to somehow save them or do something for them with support, either with money or I don't know, bringing them out or giving them some new I don't know, opportunities. Even if I saw that it was quite, I tried to make it as understandable for each of us as possible. That I hear from a mutual learning situation. My position couldn't really change in that short time, and that was a really interesting experience for me. Also, I think the most important was this kind of position that it was really hard for me. So colonization. We most of the time we think about it as I don't know, as it would only have an impact or an effect on the people who came there and I don't know, and colonized the countries, but it has also a big effect on the people living there and how they approach themselves and the people who are arriving there. And we had a really, really interesting conversation with Fatima. You could see her in the documentary. She's the one who has a Tanzanian father and a Hungarian mother. And actually, her father, he also arrived to Hungary during that time when the universities were quite open for people coming from Africa, and he had to leave just before Fatima birth. And she also shared that it's really hard for her to see this kind of approach towards her as well. So yeah, I think that was the most important for me. And how to create situation, as I told you, I tried my best to create a situation where equality can really exist and can be really present. I think in the case of the performance, it could happen. So in the case of the performance, we worked together with Taonga and Mercy and Fatima and Piri, the 4 artists who were seen in the performance. They really shared their own stories. They found, so I think one of the one of the important parts was to find a common topic that's common for both parties. So what we experienced together, and that was the climate change at the end, and how they fears. What kind of fears they have, what kind of fears they share, and what's the differences between their fears. So the first part was to try to find something which is not something like we want to observe on the other side, on the other person's perspective, but what we can share with each other. But it's also, I think, it's really important to be aware of the differences as well. That even if we had a common topic, we experienced it really differently, and we always need to be aware to not become a melting pot. I think those two, of course, beside respect, respecting the other and respecting the other's perspective, which can be really, really different. And that's what came to my mind.
In our cooperation with the Confining Project, our main partner was Nafasi Art Space in Tanzania, and Museum of Female Stories in Lusaka. And when we're thinking of what should we do together, we agreed that maybe it would be good to consider the influence of socialism or communism on both countries, and maybe we thought also about considering the cooperation between East or Central Europe with Eastern Africa, which seemed more possible, I think, to grasp, to map somehow this variety. And then it was easier due to the historical connections that we've had, some historical connections we've had. And again, let me recommend the book that we published in connection with the Museum of Women's History in Lusaka. And then looking back, I thought, was it really sensible to group Europe and Africa like that, East Europe, Eastern Europe, Eastern Africa, because I think we can talk about some commonality between the countries of Central and Eastern Europe and Western Europe that was the main colonizer of the world. I mean, Western Europe, of course. And there are some myths, there are some dreams that we may share, but still the world was different in the Western Europe for a long, long time. So can we really think about Central and Eastern Europe being separate from the rest of the Europe, and because of that having it easier or different when forming relations with the countries from outside of Europe? I think yes. I think, and we should have used it more often in the past. We should be using it more often now. I'm usually answering with an anecdote, with hearing such questions that was said by my friend from Kenya, who studied and worked here for 6 years, and then she left to Nairobi some time ago. She's younger than me, but as many young people from that part of the world, the fact that she left and studied here, that was her first time she left the continent, and she started learning about Europe from us, Poles. And then during holidays, she traveled to Berlin, Portugal, and this is what you usually do when you stay somewhere for longer. It's easier than due to the visa situation, permits, and not having all those difficulties as if when somebody tries to enter Europe from abroad. But she said she feels differently in Poland. Probably it was also due to the language barrier, because, well, she spoke some Polish, and then all the other languages of Western Europe were easier to decode for her. English mostly, of course, French. And then she said that in the West, she says she feels this hundreds of years of colonialism, this proportion of power, different perception of that. And here in Poland, she would feel maybe some unhealthy interests because she's so different than people who usually walk the street in Poland. But then it's not embedded in the culture so much, in the social relations so much, as in other Western countries. And I think this is the advantage that should be really appreciated in Poland, especially among students that after war in Ukraine started choosing Polish universities. These are these major growths that Roland mentioned. I think, yes, there is a difference. I don't think we fully grasped it or capitalized on it as a chance that we could somehow take advantage of, that could build or foster these relations, and then maybe solve some potential challenges we might be having from a different perspective, having different intention in mind. Of course, what they say about good intentions, but still, we should remember it. We may not be perfect in everything we do, but I think we should capitalize on this difference, and we should draw conclusions. Maybe not boast it that we have never been a colonizer, but we should turn it into solutions, into ways of thinking that we can then spread. And, of course, it also contributes to our society having separate experiences than those in the West. I hope it's clear what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I agree. That's clear. And I wouldn't like to talk about ethical issues because we capitalize our difference in relation to Africa. In Africa, as probably you know, there are some dogmas, and we hear all the time two things. First of all, decolonization, and second of all, the African responses to African problems. This is a narrative of African politicians backed up by nothing special, nothing significant. And I'm talking about that because there in the African narrative, I'm talking about political narrative, there is a generalization because not only we generalize, we not only think of Africa as a unified continent, Africa does the same. They don't play nuances. They think that Europe is one continent. That's what I mean by improving our relations with Africa is about the dialogue, not about criticizing ourselves for the past. So, okay, let's get back to the discussion. For the majority of my interlocutors in Africa, Europe was a unity. I'm talking about the colonizers were unities. They were people who attacked them and so on and so forth. But in European Union, we have 27 countries. That's what I said. Only 7 had colonies, including Spain, and 20 never ever had any colony. And we were colonized in Europe as well by like Poland, Lithuania, Eastern Central Europe. We all know history. So that's a surprise for some of my interlocutors in Africa. And I think the narrative that is more open and bigger in not only in Polish diplomacy plays major role. I will talk about our Ministry of Foreign Affairs during the UN meeting. Radosław Sikorski talked about it. So I will try to cut it short with an anecdote. It sounds like an anecdote, but it's actually not. This is my experience from Addis Ababa. But in this context, how Ethiopians perceive us, Europeans, not Poles. I told you at the beginning that in terms of political contact, everything it works perfectly. But one topic is triggering both sides. But in general, the Russian narrative sells better in terms of Russian-Ukrainian war than Polish narrative. So when I had a discussion with my language teacher, and you have to know that this teacher is well educated, with a lot of diplomats working with diplomacy. He owns a language school. He was educated in Saudi Arabia, in American schools. So not a common Ethiopian, but someone with big cultural experience. And he said, well, evil, Europe, CNN and America, Europe, they are evil. But I asked, why do you support Russia in this conflict with Ukraine? And he replied, because they are like us. And I asked, what do you mean that they are like you? They are Orthodox, as we are in Ethiopia. Or Ethiopian Orthodox Church is one of the oldest one in the world, and the last emperor of Ethiopia is directed with the Orthodox Russian Church. And I said, but you know, in Ukraine they also have the same religion. But I replied, but Russians are like we are. They don't drink vodka and they don't eat pork. And I then realized, there's no sense to use logical arguments because this is about imagination. This is about some ideology, and I will never break that wall. But we have to try at least. Unfortunately, we were unsuccessful in our Polish colonization, but Russia had for 3 weeks colony in Africa, in Djibouti, but French kicked them out of that. So there are still some emotions that are present, and they don't accept the argument that the Russians are colonizers, and they are imperialists. And I think these two words, colonizer, imperialism, are important to communicate with African soul, to say. I would like to add one thing, because when I was for several months ago, I asked the author of the book, Africa is Not a Country. I asked him about this memory among Nigerian citizens in terms of our relations in the second half of the 20th century. And he replied to me, and this is important in the context of in terms of your what you said about the sentiment to Russia, that the majority of people associates this relation with the Soviet bloc through the prism of Russia. We are also perceived as a monolith in Europe. Then, if there is any memory of the fact that one part did something else and the other part did something else as well, that there are some Europeans with different history, that we were not all colonizers, the Moscow was for a very long time a point, including and gathering all sentiments and imaginary ideas. And that's why this political situation is difficult, because we had to distance ourselves to that, and it's now more difficult to rediscover the previous relations. And these relations were not managed by Moscow in Africa, especially from the 1960s. That was more of competition of different bodies from the Eastern and Central Europe. Poland, Bulgaria were trying to export their goods. A lot of Croatian architects also worked there. So this is a different story. But I think what connects that all is Russia, and it doesn't make things easier. It makes things difficult. I would like to add one more thing. I think that may be interesting for those of you who are interested in our relations with Africa, Poles in Africa. I will refer to my Ethiopia. Despite the fact that we don't have quite a lot of experience of relations, we have the baggage of relations, and there were people who played a significant role in particular areas of life or development of African nations. I'm talking about Poles in Ethiopia, or I'm talking books for law students in Addis Ababa and at other universities in the country are written by a Pole, because he, for the emperor, modified law in Africa, and the professor stayed in Ethiopia and he codified the law. And they remember him, and we were even asked to find his children, grandchildren, but we didn't manage to do so because he didn't left any family behind. This is one person. The second one in Addis Ababa is Stanisław Chojnacki, Polish anthropologist, who created first topographic museum of Addis Ababa. We can start from something. There are a lot of wonderful people in our history in Africa. And when I said at the beginning that the short period of my life, actually 4 years, I spent in India and Ethiopia, affected me quite a lot. And it did it because in these countries, I met incredible people. Now, there is in your book a hero. She came back to Kenya and she likes everything except for people. In my it was different in my situation. In these countries, I met wonderful Poles. In African countries, I met wonderful Poles. Good people, honest people, active, engaged, trying to work hard for others, and that was a lesson for me, the lesson of humanity. Do you have any questions? If yes, let us know. Or do you have any comments? Raise your hands. If not, I will ask. Do you have any experience, your experience, or experience from the past, in which intercultural cooperation actually led to the change of thinking on both sides, on both parties? What were the conditions of that? Give us good examples, please. Okay, I can start. 2 sentences. I think that it's difficult to expect from one project or from one event that it would change the way of thinking. I think in the cultural relations, what is important is the process itself, the process of creating and the results of a given project, of a given piece of art, because in terms of comparing Europe and Africa, this will make sense if we start with a conversation. I know and I have seen a lot of people with great intentions. They had great ideas how to help Africa, but they've never been there. And it's not that we are now working hard and doing our best to help others. We have to start from a simple dialogue. We have to co-create things. Then it will make sense. And if not, and I know it perfectly from my life as a diplomat, that would be another concert created by diplomats for diplomats.
Yeah, I can really relate to that. I think it's especially important to create spaces and projects where it's possible to really step in a conversation together. Yeah, because of this approach of the colonizational, I don't know, perspective or approach that we are here to help. It's still, as I said, I still exist in both sides. There are expectations towards that, and I can really relate to that as well. That it's really important to have as long conversations as it's possible, because time it's really what we need for that to happen, to really have an impact on the intercultural relations and a lot of experiences. Yeah.
Daniel, would you pass mic to our speaker? To Karolina? Karolina would like to say something. That's me again. I would like to refer to what you said. And first of all, thank you that you are with us, that you share your stories. I would like to share my perspective. Several years ago, we were lucky enough to publish a catalogue of works by Leon Podsiadły, Professor Leon Podsiadły. A different story, I know, but the same continent. Similar situation. When the international project taught us how much resources we have here. 2016, when Wrocław was the capital of book by UNESCO, and then next year it was the city in Guinea, Conakry in Guinea, and the only one person that is associated with Africa among these people from survival, I was asked to talk about this project, and It wasn't actually the first time when Wrocław had relations with Conakry. Historically speaking, we have very close relations, and we had it in the 50s. And in the 60s, this exchange was very intensive. And it seemed that a prominent teacher of the School of Fine Arts, Leon Podsiadły, lived in Conakry for 5 years. And similarly to your story, he was one of the co-creators of the National Museum in Conakry. With his brother, Felix, they were responsible for preparing the staging and design of the exhibition. And I totally agree with Oliwia that at the moment there is a thaw time. We remember about the past because the time has passed. So now we can talk about the communist era from different perspectives. We can dig in interesting stories, and there are quite a lot of them, because Leon Podsiadły was the first one, and then another prominent artist, Anna Szpakowska-Kujawska, in the 80s, not only lived with her husband in Nigeria. Her husband was an architect, but they spent there 8 or 9 years. He was one of the architects working on contracts. But Anna also created there a wonderful art that is shown in Wrocław. And despite the fact that each time we start the discussion about Polish-African relation, we think that we start from the scratch, that's not the truth. We have very rich, a very interesting past of cultural and diplomatic, economic relations. But I think that sometimes we have the common amnesia. We have a mass amnesia and we forget about it. We are not satisfied with the past. I don't know what's the reason for that. I'm not talking about scandalous people. I'm not talking about the adventurers. I'm talking about others, other artists, professors, and we have to revoke the history and biographies of such people because we can learn from them. That's my commentary.
Let me just add that in terms of the story of Poles in Nigeria, there is a book. Imagine it's in 4 volumes. But it's not only Nigeria, yes, but it's about the story of Poles in Africa in general. Yeah, the first top volume maybe about Nigeria, maybe that's the case. Any other comments or questions? If not, maybe you wanted to have the final say, final conclusion. If not, I would like to thank you very much for this conversation, for visiting us in Survival. Thank you, the audience, very much for listening in, asking questions. I would like to encourage everyone to see the results of our cooperation with Navasi Art Space in Dar es Salaam. 5 video works you can find in the Dungeons by Moses Ikiza, Dr. Teflon from Uganda, artist from Tanzania, an artist from Krakow, from Prague, and one artist from Poland. But she's been living in Leipzig for a long time, so also has the German perspective. So this is the exhibition. This is what the exhibition is about. Thank you very much. Have great moments, last moments of our art review, and enjoy. Thank you.